Thank you. Thank you. Boy, the lights are bright tonight. I can barely see you. Thank you all for being here. It's going to be an amazing evening, and I'm excited about it. And it's just been a wonderful weekend, our climate change awareness weekend. We've had this amazing meeting, which has been sobering, about water, and in the context of climate change. And as many of you, I think, were here, I hope last night, we had a documentary which was before the flood about the impact of climate change, and tonight we're going to complement it with not a documentary, with a feature film which views this from a very different perspective, and yet addresses issues that I think complement what we'll have seen yesterday. But the best part about it is that we have the director of the film here, and who is undoubtedly one of the greatest directors of all time, and a remarkable human being who we'll learn about as well when we and also, of course, after the film, we'll have Werner out here along with another remarkable human being, Jeffrey Sachs, who's in the audience somewhere if he can stand up. There he is, and it's going to be an amazing night. And so I forgot last night, but after the movie's over, you have question cards in your packet there. Bring them down, and during intermission, we'll choose from them. But for the moment, I'd like to invite out one of my heroes, Werner Herzog, to talk about the film. Werner?
Thank you. I'm here for the second time. I was here a few years ago at a very remarkable event, and there was Cormac McCarthy, whom I adore as a writer. I think the best writer that America has at this time. And I was introduced through Lawrence Krauss to him. We have a strange prehistory, Lawrence and I had a film at the Sundance Film Festival called Grizzly Man. And Lawrence Krauss was on one of the juries which gave its award to Grizzly Man. And we met later after the screening. And I immediately was somehow drawn to Lawrence. And I said to him, what is your profession? And he said, I'm a physicist, a cosmologist. And somehow out of the blue, I said to him, but you look like a gangster. And you have this confidence and this kind, you should play a villain in one of my films. And lo and behold, you will see him in the film that you are seeing right now as a villain. And just in the previous film that I made, or one of the very preceding films, lo and behold, Reveries of the Connected World, a film on the internet. Lawrence Krauss is one of the key persons in it, and I asked him some very odd and very deep, unanswerable questions, and one of them was my so-called Clausewitz question, named after the war theoretician, Prussian war theoretician, Napoleonic times, who famously once said, war sometimes dreams of itself. Now I expand, does the internet dream of itself? And I leave him alone with his question. And it's good to see that. And some others I ask the same question. About the film that you are seeing now, Salt and Fire, I read on the internet, and it's all over the internet, that it is an ecological thriller. It's a strange labeling. It is not. I think it's something different. I can't really describe it exactly, but it equally has to do with anamorphic art, dialogues about talking parrots who quote Ecclesiastes and all sorts of things, and two local boys who only speak Quechua and some Spanish are stranded together with the protagonist of the film in a salt desert in Bolivia. Actually, it's never named. And it is about an ecological man-made disaster, which in my film is a fictitious. It is a fictitious disaster, but it's based on a real one, and we can speak about it later. But just whatever is coming at you, you will never know what's coming next.
Exactly.
Okay, please enjoy it.
Enjoy. We'll see you in a bit. Thank you. Thank you for being still here. Thank you for being here, and we'll get to the movie and some other things in a second. Well, but I want to before I bring out my two guests, I didn't want them to be embarrassed while I was talking about them while they were sitting here. But so let me just tell you that there are people in life that you admire tremendously, and then you meet them, and that changes. But there are people that you admire in life, and then you meet them, and you feel like your admiration was not sufficient. It makes you feel humble and inadequate. And the two gentlemen that I'm going to introduce both make me feel that way. They're both old, they're friends of mine, and they're both two of the most remarkable people I've ever known. Werner Herzog is, as I said earlier, one of the preeminent filmmakers of all time. I read two quotes which I think aptly describe him. One from Vanity Fair, which said he is the most interesting man on the planet. and one from François Truffaut, who I was very fond of as a very famous filmmaker, who said that Werner is the most important film director alive. And from François Truffaut, that is an amazing thing. Jeffrey Sachs is a profoundly important scholar and public intellectual, one of the most important economists on the planet. And in fact, the New York Times called him probably the most important economist in the world. He is one of the most well-read, most sympathetic, and most intelligent men I've ever known. So I think it'll be a wonderful discussion, and I'd like to bring them both out. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, it is a pleasure, but I think we have to start with the film. Let's start a little bit about you, Werner, before we get to the film. I do want to ask you one or two questions about the film that I didn't have the courage to when we were making it. He seems very nice in real life, but when he's a director, he's terrifying. I will say that I think I told you this, that I'd planned all along at some point during the filming to be sitting in the wheelchair and suddenly go. But Werner was too terrifying to even consider that. He wouldn't hit me. But you made your first film when you were 19?
I was 19, yeah.
Most of us know you first from Aguirre, The Wrath of God, which I saw when I was it was a wonderful movie. And many people think it was your first film, but it wasn't.
It was my
11th film.
But I was about the age of most of the students here.
Exactly, and that's what I remember the very first time I met you, how upset I was to discover that I'd been a graduate student. I remember seeing that and Fitzcarraldo, one of the most amazing movies ever made. You can applaud with that as well, in fact. I saw that when I was a graduate student, and then when I was a postdoc at Harvard, and I remember seeing it, and then when we met the first time, I was so disappointed to discover you weren't much older than me, and that while I was doing this, you were making these kind of movies, and you were my age. It was amazing. And we'll talk about your relationship with nature a little bit, I think, in this. But you like to walk. And maybe could you tell the story about just an example of for me, it was very moving. One of your mentors was ill. Do you want to give that story a little?
Well, I would call it traveling on foot, because I'm not somebody who would set out with a backpack and tent and sleeping bag and cooking utensils. meaning with your household on your back. When I travel, I have barely any luggage, or literally nothing. And I once traveled, and I'm lazy as everyone else, but the essential things I would do on foot. And an old lady, Lotte Eisner, was somehow critically ill, and I got a call. She was about 80 years old, and she had been some sort of a mentor of mine, also important for the young generation of emerging filmmakers in the 60s. And she had to flee from Nazi Germany. Actually, she had been very vociferous against the Nazis, the rising Nazis. And in Der Stürmer, one of the most vile and debased publications in Nazi Germany or pre-Nazi Germany, there was an article about her, the Jewish communist, whatever, and some expletives, has written another article against the Nazis. If heads roll, her head is going to roll among the first. So she fled the very day, I think, Hitler took power, and was in hiding in France, survived the war, survived everything, was very intensely engaged in the emerging Cinémathèque in Paris. And she saw what was happening with the young filmmakers, and she said publicly, for the first time, there's a new generation coming up that has legitimacy. They are doing legitimate German culture again. And hardly anyone would believe it, including Fritz Lang, who lived in Los Angeles at that time, and he wrote to her, Lotte, there will never be any good films out of Germany. And she said, I send you a film, a print of a young man who made his first feature film, Signs of Life, and it was my film. She sent it to Fritz Lang, and Fritz Lang sent a letter back and said, Lotte, I know what you're meaning. So when she was critically ill, I knew, and a friend of mine said, come quickly, she's dying. And I pondered for a moment, what's the fastest train or flight connection? And then I decided, now I would come on foot. I would not allow her to die. It was too early. We still needed her. I still needed her. We were still too fragile. And she wouldn't die because I was coming on foot. And she must not die. There was no chance I would give her to die. But when I arrived, she didn't know that I came. And
walked from Munich to Paris.
From Munich to Paris at the beginning of winter, and there were snowstorms, and it was really, really a hard trek. And I walked cross country, the straightest possible line I could do, wading through frozen rivers and over the Black Forest, and so it plowed my way to Paris. And she was out of hospital, and she survived. And it was very strange. Later, 8 years later, we were in contact. She urged me, she said, please come to Paris, come now, and take a train or whatever. So I took a train. And she said to me very casually, and we were very formal. We would say usted to each other, like in Spanish, or vous in French. And she said, I'm old now and I can barely see anymore. I'm almost blind. All the joy of my life, being able to read, is gone. I cannot see movies anymore. I can barely walk anymore. I'm almost paralyzed. And she said something very biblical. I'm saturated of life. And it would be time now for me to die. And I said, Lotte, yes, it sounds all right for me. But she said, but there's still this spell upon me that I cannot die. that I must not die. Can you lift it? And I said, sure, it's lifted hereby. And she died 8 days later. And I found it totally all right. And
Incredible power.
no, I'm not superstitious. It was a statistical anomaly. Let's name it like this. But she was very dear to my heart. And actually, when I was walking, I wrote diaries or short notes. And years later, I published it. It's now also published in English, University of Minnesota Press. It's called Off Walking in Ice.
We may have it. I think we'll do a book signing afterwards, and it may be out there, so we can. So let's jump ahead. So why this movie? Why now? Why? Well, let me say this. Before this, I was in a movie of yours, a documentary, lo and behold, and you could have done a documentary about climate change, or at least environmental disaster, and you've done a movie about volcanoes recently.
Yeah.
Why? What was it about this story that made you decide to do it?
Well, I would say it's not the central sort of element in the film that it's about a side of an ecological disaster. In fact, it is a fictitious disaster. Diablo Blanco doesn't exist, but it was based on a short story by a talented young American writer, Tom Bissell, Aral. And Aral, this gigantic lake that dried out, is a man-made disaster in Central Asia.
It is.
And you know quite well about it. But of course, for me, it was also about looking at things from a different angle, like the saint under the tree. All of a sudden, the saint stretches out and morphs into a landscape, into the Strait of Messina, and all sorts of things that have been spinning in my mind. And of course, two blind boys being exposed with a leading character in the film. So I just wanted to make the film very badly, and that's how we did it. We had very, very short time to do it, only 16 days of filming. That's very, very little. I mean, I've never had such a condensed sort of time for shooting.
It was an amazing...
But I think we shouldn't talk so much about the film.
Well, there's one thing I do want to talk about the film, and it'll lead into the discussion I want to have for all three of us, which is, for me, which I thought was interesting. I mean, the central premise, in some sense, of his kidnapping Laura is to take what was just numbers and put a face on it. And
human story all of a sudden in it.
And that allows me to bring you in, Jeffrey, because you've been...
But before we go there, was he your best villain ever?
No, I think Klaus Kinski must have been. I was the best villain.
Truly,
I was the best villain named Krauss.
Very well cast, no question about it.
No, thank you. I will say that, when Werner said, don't overstudy your lines, but I had to come early to Bolivia. I was in Prague right before that, and because he wanted me to learn how to use the wheelchair, which was more important. And I understand that now. Anyway, but the movie in that sense is to take what was numbers and data and put a human face on something which would then have more of an impact on the public. And now I want to turn to you in that regard, because Jeffrey, you're indeed one of the world's most famous economists. We were both at Harvard around the same time, and you were in the Society of Fellows 2 years before me. The difference was you became a full professor almost immediately afterwards. It took me a long time. And you were the youngest tenured professor in the history of Harvard, which I'll point out, which says something. And then after 30 years at Harvard, you moved to Columbia, and at that point in 2000, you became, was it senior advisor to the Director General of the United Nations? During which time you've looked at development, poverty, and climate change issues, trying to improve, and medical issues and health issues, but always, it seems to me, focusing on people and not dollars, focusing on the human impact of everything you've been involved in. And you want to talk about that transformation a little bit, about why that's important to you?
Yeah, and I want to start in Bolivia actually, because it happens that that was a transformative moment in my life. I had become professor, as you said, at Harvard and tenured in 1983. And when you get tenure, as you know, they give you a sign, you know everything. And you can put that on your wall. And then some students asked me in 1985, by coincidence, Bolivia was in one of the worst economic crises actually in modern times. The inflation rate had reached 60,000%. It was a complete collapse of the country. And so I thought, they asked me to come and see what I could do. And I just remembered from landing in the airport, I wasn't kidnapped that way, but I remember stepping out of the plane, taking a breath. There was no oxygen. That was the first thing you notice when you land in La Paz. And then that was 32 years ago. But the most important thing for me was that I realized from that day, whatever I was trained, whatever I knew nothing about how to really, what was really happening. That was my real learning experience, was getting out of the classroom, out of the university. I knew a little bit. I was able to help them a bit on the hyperinflation, but they were able to help me a lot more, which was to keep your eyes open of what's happening in this world. And I would have no imagination, no capacity to understand, say, the Bolivian reality or anything else that I have been fortunate to see in the last 32 years of this kind of active work on the ground without being there. And what you see all over the world is a veritable tragedy. That I think is the overwhelming sad part of this when it comes to the kinds of environmental issues that the film is showing in this kind of oblique way. My wife, Sonia, who's here with me, and by the way, I think Aguirre, Wrath of God was probably the first movie we saw together when we came to school together 45 years ago. But we were just together in Tehran, and this is poignant for me. We were actually in an apartment and out on a balcony, and it was a completely gray, polluted day, it seemed. And then it was explained, this is the sandstorms that we're having every day, because I wasn't used to sandstorms that way. It just looked like a gray, polluted day. But Iran has dried so much, and the surface lakes have disappeared the same way that the Aral Sea has, but much smaller surface lakes that Iran depends on are disappearing. And next door in Iraq, the sand is coming across from Iraq. So what are we doing about it? You might think that the human reaction might be that we're working together to solve these problems. Of course, when we were there, we were the only Americans anywhere nearby because, we're virtually at a state of war, which is absurd with this country, because we should be working to solve these problems. Iraq, which is in absolutely desperate shape because the same complete desiccation has taken place. Our solution there is to bomb, we're fighting. There's nobody solving problems together. So that's the other side of this, that while the film is a wonderful perspective and it's not a didactic lecture, what it is pointing to and what it is telling us when there are 8 days of water left, there's a lot of reality to this, and we are blind to it. We're not paying attention, and sadly, and it's my biggest regret and my biggest surprise, I have to say, and because I remember how proud I was to be an American in the mid-1980s going to help someplace. And now you try to explain our president. It's very hard, by the way, when you're traveling abroad. It's hard here, but it's very hard abroad. And
I think we have a sympathetic crowd here.
And what you can't explain is what, not just him, but what it is that is preventing us from understanding that we have all these shared problems, and we should be working together because it would be not only vital for our mutual survival, but also incredibly invigorating if we were actually doing things together to solve problems.
It seems so simple, doesn't it? I mean, it really. Now, let me follow that up, because we've had. So you've dealt with probably through the United Nations probably 100 different heads of state, worked with them directly, and had generally the same experience as I think you were saying, which was most often a disappointing one. Maybe you could talk about Yemen. You told me a story about Yemen, which I think is particularly relevant to what we're going to talk about, which has to do with water. And I mean, we've had this meeting on water and the movies about water, and we'll talk about the impacts in some sense of water before we get to the questions which do relate to climate change. But maybe your story about Yemen.
Yeah, it's my proud moment that I showed up in WikiLeaks in the Yemen papers, so you can check it out. But it happened because, again, Sonia, who's a public health specialist, and I went to look at the economics, she to look at the public health. We were invited by the president of Yemen in 2009 to have a look around the country to give some ideas about what to do. And it was very frightening, actually. You know, my job at this point, having seen a lot of places around the world, is to see like a quick checkup. What do you see if a patient comes in? And Yemen was in bad shape, very bad shape, because Yemen, like the other countries of the Middle East, are drying. They're experiencing global warming. Yes, it's real. Yes, it's us. Don't have any doubt. There is no doubt about that. And the famine and hunger is worsening. So it was one of those experiences that was absolutely stark. And you could see in just a week to 10 days that this was a country on the edge of catastrophe. And I gave a talk to the diplomatic community. That's what showed up in WikiLeaks several years later, because the US ambassador cabled back my, in a pretty straightforward way, by the way, cabled back my report. And I was shocked, you know, I was really stunned because I've seen a lot of crises, and this was a country just at the edge of collapse. So I went to Washington, I went to the UN, I went everywhere, and for probably a month or two, I was talking about Yemen. And you get just blank faces back in Washington. Why are you talking to me about Yemen?
They don't even know where Yemen is.
Yeah.
Is Yemen a suburb of Saudi Arabia or something? Yeah.
Complete. You felt a little foolish. I'm sorry to bother you, but there are a lot of people there, and this country is in crisis. Well, as in many times in my experience in the last 20 years, no reaction at all. Because Washington is brain dead, ladies and gentlemen. Completely brain dead. And if there's any appearance of thought, it's a complete show. They're not studying any issues, they're not analyzing any issues, and they don't give a damn. Except for the tax cuts that they're trying to get through. And honestly, the only thing they want to do is cut your health benefits to give tax cuts. That's the only dream they have. It's their highest dream. So anyway, I had no no success at all, nothing. That's typical, by the way. That's not unusual. And then, of course, now Yemen, if you're following, you have to follow not necessarily the mainstream media because they don't report very much about it, but Yemen is being destroyed in war. Well, duh. People were hungry. There was food crisis. There was climate crisis. There was water crisis. There was public health disaster with a cot epidemic. It's predictable. And you have to look at that and say, can't we do better? And the answer is, of course we could do better, but you have to give a damn before the war starts.
And then when the war starts, the response in other places is to send bombs and not to help people.
Yeah.
I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, and I voted twice for President Obama, and there's infinitely better than what we have right now, so I don't want to be misunderstood, and much better than the one that came before him. But his administration did nothing on these issues.
Yeah.
He tried to get it. Now, he signed the Paris Climate Agreement. That was a big step, and he did diplomacy on that. But when it came,
the agreement itself doesn't prescribe any actions. It's a letter of intent.
yes, but even I'll give him credit for signing it. But
Yeah.
but the main point is, when it actually came, he gave a speech in Cairo. The only follow-up, remember early on he gave a speech and we're going to make peace with the Muslim world and so forth. In truth, the only thing that happened was he stayed in the Afghanistan war, continued in the Iraq war, launched the Libyan war with our good allies, France and UK, and sent the CIA to cooperate with Saudi Arabia to try to overthrow the Assad regime in Syria. So all we ended up, and to send drones to Yemen. And the reason that that's relevant is one thing to think about, ladies and gentlemen, on all of that is that this is ecologically one long string of desert and dryland areas where the encroachment of climate change, desiccation, desertification is one of the underlying slow motion drivers of this crisis.
Let me interrupt it. I want you to come back because that's a key point that was talked about in our meeting, and I'll get to you in a second, because I knew you have some thoughts on this too. But there's climate. We were talking about water, and water is going to be an issue in a lot of places because there are going to be increasing droughts, including here in the Southwest with climate change. And often one just looks at the technical aspects, sea level rise, temperature change, difficulty of life. But what isn't often talked about is the socio-political consequences, and that's what I want you.
But Lawrence, I'd like to say something about, in general, from outside now. We have seen the film with Leonardo DiCaprio yesterday, and we see a lot of him going to all the crisis spots, but he is talking to the General Assembly of the United Nations. He is at the Paris signing of the accord. He speaks to President Obama. Now he has spoken to President Trump. He has been, you're just all over the place, and nothing has happened. And it is of no consequence. And you have been all over the world, and you have seen the things, and the diplomats or the Assistant Secretary of State doesn't even know where Yemen is and whether the Yemen is a suburb of Africa. Right. So it comes to that. So it has not led to anything, and it's not going to lead to much. So what remains now? It's us, every single one of us. There's no magic bullet, but it's very easy. We don't even have to change much of our lifestyle. Of course, we have two phenomenal problems that we cannot solve easily. One is we are overpopulated, the population is too large. Secondly, most of the world is in the mood of consumerism. But we could, when we look at the United States and most of the Western countries, we are throwing away 45% of our food. If we manage our fridge a little bit better, and if we do not heap such loads on our plate and throw then 40% away. We could actually reduce food production by, I would say, 25-30% easily. And it costs, we know how much water it costs, for example, to create one hamburger.
700 gallons.
700 gallons of water.
Just 3 tons of water to make it.
I still like to eat a steak once in a while. And I feel all right because I personally, because right after the war, for a couple of years, my older brother and I, we were always hungry, and I understand the value of food. And it pains me when I see that food is being thrown away. I throw away maybe 1 or 2% of food. It happens that I overlook that the milk has gone sour in the fridge. So it does happen, but we could very easily reduce it massively. And it would, agriculture, the amount of water, the amount of transport energy, the amount of pollution, the amount of distribution systems could be drastically reduced, and nobody would even feel any change in lifestyle. When I walk out of, and it's every single one of us should start to do that, and it's so easy. Some things that I'm doing, for example, I drive only 10% in my car what I used to drive 25 years ago. Today I'm driving 3,000 miles a year, 4,000 miles. 25 years ago I was driving 40,000 miles in a year in my car, which is insane. I do a lot now, long live the internet, through written contacts instead of driving everywhere. I do sometimes Skype with my family only, just to see my granddaughter in Belgium for a moment. And it's very easy. I walk out of a room and without even thinking, I switch off the light. It's so easy.
I think that's really important, and that came up yesterday. The question is how you feel helpless in the face of grand things like climate change. What can each individual do? And I think your point is really well. Each individual we can individually affect things if everyone changes the way they think about a few things. The part of the problem is it is hard, especially in a world in which more money is spent as we said last night, I think, by the Koch brothers to lie about the environment than is spent to support the entire.
Forget about the Koch brothers.
No, I know, but the point is it's hard.
Forget about do something yourself.
But I think it's a little of both, because we should understand, where we are is a great illustration of it. You got a lot of solar power in the neighborhood here.
Yeah, exactly.
Arizona could provide enough solar energy for the whole country easily.
Yeah. And that has been understood.
Yes, and
what is the real level,
what is the real barrier to this now? It's not the technology. It's not the incremental costs. It is the resistance of the old guard.
Yeah, exactly.
This, I think, is really important to understand. It's not that it's going to break the bank, that it's unaffordable to move to renewable energy, to get systems responses. It's that the Koch brothers, the two of them, would not be worth $100 billion.
Because
that's the basic.
These things affect people's perceptions.
Yes, but let's out-million them. We are 7,600 million people on this planet.
Yes,
but we have to.
And we can take action. Not all of them. For example, people who are forced because of their profession to commute. I would not advise them drive only 3,000 miles, and I would not ask a tribal. A village woman in India not to burn a few twigs and cow manure, dried cow manure. Of course it pollutes, but you see, in the area where we live, and it's a good amount of human beings, and I would include the Chinese, for example, in this. We can do a lot and forget about politics. Forget about it.
But we can forget about politics, except as we saw in the movie last night, there's a difference in the fact that the media in China regularly talk about climate change and the importance of it. And people, we need, and this is one of there are a bunch of questions that are relevant what we're talking about now. The question is, you're absolutely right. If people en masse act, it has an effect. But to get people en masse to act, people have to be aware of the problem. And the question is, how can you make them aware? In fact, let me just ask this question. I want to get these questions in the language of the people in the audience who ask them. So Justin asked, how can we utilize emotion to convince climate change deniers when facts are not sufficient? So do we have to use emotion? How can we get people to act?
Emotions, I wouldn't trust very much into the kind of vanilla ice cream dripping sort of emotions. We just look at what we are doing and what we are, and for example, people think about in complex terms about food. I've been in a van for 2 days. There were 12 women in this van, and for 2 days there was non-stop talk about nutritional values and about I don't know what, anorexia, and there was talk about gluten-free. And after half a day, I wanted to jump out of the car. But what I'm trying to say, there's a huge awareness, and a huge awareness, demonization of certain things, demonization of fat. When you buy salt, the first thing in nutritional value says total content of fat, 0. And you buy a bottle of water, of regular water in the supermarket, the first thing that shows up, total content of fat, 0. What a complete and utter distortion of minds is going on there.
Well, that's a distortion.
But there's a, yes, but instead of wasting our energies in gluten-free and fat-free salt, we should rather look into our fridge. Is the salad rotting away?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And should we eat it quickly?
But let me. Absolutely, I agree we should. But let me suggest that the story that Jeffrey might tell, and I want him to continue what he's talking about Syria in particular. How can you reach people? Because people think these things are largely remote. In fact, climate change is really going to affect far more the countries that can't afford to deal with it, and particularly the equatorial regions of the world, who will then produce, their land mass will go away and will produce refugees, not by the thousands or the millions, but potentially by the billions. And we're now seeing a global problem. If you could continue about the effect of drought and how it affects us now on an immediate way, I think that if people feel connected, it makes a difference. So, yes, I want to continue that story because I think it's really an important one about how the drought in that area, what it's resulted in.
Let me do that.
Okay, you go to where you want first.
Yeah,
but get there
and also to come back to Werner's point, because I do think that it is more complicated for a real reason. Let me put it this way. We really need electricity in this world. Absolutely. And I know firsthand from a way that I wouldn't have 20 years ago, and that's from working quite a bit now in the last 20 years in places that have no electricity. Bottom line, the kids die. You know, without electricity, you don't have pumped water, you don't have even any safe storage of food, you don't have, of course, basic communications. Kids can't study at night, you can't run basic machinery, people live in extreme poverty. So we're 7.5 billion people. This is a complicated reality. And everybody wants electricity now. By the way, everybody does have a cell phone now. This is true.
I don't
but they don't all have electricity.
Sorry, I don't have a cell phone.
Pardon me?
I do not have a cell phone.
Okay, everybody but one has a cell phone. And some people have two.
That's why he's the most interesting man on the planet.
But actually, of course, you made a wonderful movie about that, and also showed some people who can't be anywhere close to cell phones. Yeah. Maybe that's true for all of us. But the fact is that the world's needs for transport, for energy, for material transformation, those are real. And when you multiply any of that, even with a more frugal lifestyle and a less waste, which is absolutely right, we have a systems problem also. We have to change from burning coal to using solar power. We have to. We absolutely have to change from a dependence on internal combustion engines and petroleum and our fracking to electric vehicles, or to some, even if we're using fewer vehicles, just 7.5 billion people and people moving, we need systemic change. And so I think it's both the behavioral and the system level. And I do want to emphasize the system level because there's one big misunderstanding about it, and then there is a truth about it, which is good to know and good to understand. And the misunderstanding about it is we can't do it. It would create disaster. It would create mass unemployment. I don't know, ladies and gentlemen, how many times we've heard from Mr. Trump about how he's going to save all these wonderful coal mining jobs, which are, by the way, not wonderful jobs.
And not many.
And the question is, how many? You know, we have 150 million people in the labor force. The number of coal miners, quote, that he's saving are 20,000. Because it's all mechanized.
Yeah.
And we don't even have that industry anymore. It's bullshit, sorry. What we have is Peabody coal. That's different. That's not saving jobs. We have a lot more jobs in installing solar photovoltaics, believe me, in creating an economy that is sustainable. So the issue is not the systems transformation. That's what I want to say. It's not the difficulty of doing it. It's not the cost of doing it. It's why we really do have to pay attention to the Koch brothers. And the reason is there are just two of them. And they're really nasty. And they've made an incredible mess of this country. Because, by the way, I don't know if anyone here has $100 billion, but if you do, you can buy the whole Congress. And they only bought half of it. They bought the Republican Party. That's how it worked.
They spent, as we pointed out, they've spent $900 million in the last election.
And I talked to these people, the congressmen. I'll give you good news and bad news. The good news is they are not as stupid as they look.
Yeah.
The bad news is that they're a lot more corrupt. They're on the take. They are doing the bidding of their biggest buyers. And that's the story of our country right now, which is that we're in the hands of a few very rich, powerful people who have created this false narrative about what we can do and what we can't do and who's going to get unemployed and make America great again. This baloney, when we could really be solving problems. That's why I don't want to go away from the politics. It's not to excuse us.
I would like to say something in defense of your country. I live in your country and it has been good to me.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that. But let me tell you from outside, it is wonderful to live in a country like the United States that has very small amounts of corruption. In contrast to...
Let me introduce you to some people.
Well, yes, but go to Nigeria and make your choice.
Yeah, but
Nigeria.
But when you go to Nigeria, but it's interesting, when you go to, of course I go all the time, who's doing the corruption? Shell.
No,
it's not that, it is, Shell oil has destroyed Nigeria, destroyed the Niger Delta.
But it's everywhere. Every single person in official position is corrupt. But it goes, let's speak about the water crisis. Lagos, Nigeria has water, and all of a sudden a third of the city of 8 million or 10 million or whatever people has no water. What has happened?
Werner,
some military out of control blocked all the water. 3 days later, they come with trucks of clean water and they sell to the thirsty population a gallon of water for $5. And it's corrupt elements in the military, and they do that. And there's water in Lagos, Nigeria.
Right. I couldn't agree more. And we have a military that is spending $900 billion a year to fight wars all across the planet. Am I supposed to take that as better politics?
Your military unit near where you live in New York does not block the water supply to your home and asks you to pay $5 for a gallon from a tank car. So I'm trying to put it in proportion.
Yeah, no, and I think
I don't want to argue about comparative corruption, but our country privatized the prison system, and then the private ownership of the prison system sends out its 10K forms warning the investors that there could be a change of law that would have fewer incarcerations, and this could be damaging to our profits. And so we have 2 million people in forced incarceration. And by the way, I'm just saying, they work nearly slave labor because they are locked up and private business comes in, they are forced to work for them. This is America. So yes, I often say that there's corruption everywhere, not only in Washington, but we should understand how much we have wrecked what we have right now.
Sure.
That's my problem.
The real big thing is we have seen in the last century the great sort of.
But this is interesting that Werner Herzog's defending America, and I'm.
Yes, because
no, and I think it's appropriate.
Yes, because I was
hoping this might happen. Actually,
I see it in contrast to countries where I have worked and that I have seen myself. And we have seen the demise of the great utopias of the last century, the devastating ones. Paradise on earth, Soviet Union will be communists. It brought so much disaster upon everyone. The Nazis, we will create a master race of such purity that there will be paradise on this planet. So thanks God, all this is wiped out. And what we have learned now is it's maintenance. It's maintenance, stupid, that counts so much. It's not the lofty ideas. It's good maintenance. If you lose your driver's license, in a week you have a new one. If you are in Greece, and I'm speaking of a Western country, and you want to have a phone line registered, it takes you 2.5 years to get a phone line, and you have to bribe 15 people en route. So, and there's a difference I see.
There's a difference, and let me try and bridge the gap. Because I'm a conciliator by nature. And
we found out what you really are by nature tonight.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not a conciliator.
Take the best of your country and reinforce it.
But the point is that I think the point is that there is sort of an organized. There's individual corruption, and then there's kind of organized corruption. And in a sense, I guess I would say that taking the situation in Syria, which resulted in part, not in whole, but in part from drought and climate conditions that forced people to move to the cities, and then through a series of political machinations, eventually suffer tremendously, and then to create, then to deal with that, instead of early on by providing the kind of support necessary, to deal with that by providing weapons and bombs, and then to say that the future, the way we need to help Syria is, and the rest of the world, as the Trump administration is doing, is to stop providing education and health and contraception to the world, the things that would help deal with the crises, but instead to spend $54 billion more in the military. That's a kind of organized corruption, I think.
Yeah, there's an old English nursery rhyme, which I think is very instructive, which says that the law locks up the man and woman who steals the goose from off the common, but lets the greater villain loose who steals the common from the goose. Yeah. And we have the greater villain, which is we're very powerful, we're very rich, we have organized a world of tax havens. The Caribbean hosts $5 trillion tax-free money under U.S. organization. A lot of it is our biggest companies, and a lot of it is the biggest crooks in the world, because that's part of the system. The U.S. protects the oil industry in this country, protects the coal industry, doesn't care about the implications for climate change in the rest of the world, because that's organized corruption. Our Supreme Court's very clever. It said it's not corrupt, it's free speech. The companies can give anything they want to the campaigns. That's free speech. We just redefine the terms. And so this is a systemic problem. I'm not meaning to say all is horrible, but what I am saying is that when you're rich and powerful, you have a bigger responsibility. Yeah, and we're absolutely not fulfilling that.
As a wise man once said, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
And but I think the point is, and it's interesting because you've come to the United States and live here now, and actually I know that through you I've come to appreciate many more things about the U.S. than I did before. But I think it's necessary to for people to speak out, because I think most Americans, when they're presented with the information, if the information could get out, if they get aware of it, they want to act correctly,
but most are not curious enough for new information.
So we have to figure out ways
That's
to
get
that information out, and I think that it's necessary when the country presents itself as always altruistic, always acting in the interest of the world, always responding in foreign policy to take care of others, which is a fiction. But it's no different than the fiction of other countries. But when it's done so effectively here, I think it's important for people, even those who recognize that the many aspects of the United States that cause many. I moved here. I came from Canada, and that caused us to want to live here.
Yes, but you're American born.
Yeah, but
you're an American. Come on, let's face it.
I grew up in Canada.
Confess.
I didn't know I was an American until I was 30. Okay. Although I could be president.
Yeah.
That'd be a good idea.
Let's forget about Trump bashing and America bashing. Let's speak about the real critical points and areas like Syria. What seems to be emerging, there are mini wars, and they are triggered by absence of drinkable water, and small fractions who ideologically name themselves ISIS or Nusra Front or God knows what. They are fighting a lot of very opaque, strange mini-wars. Same thing is happening now in northern Nigeria, Chad region, because Lake Chad is drying out like Lake Aral. And you have Boko Haram, and it spills over into northern Cameroon, it spills over into northern Nigeria, and there are mini-wars emerging, and they will grow in size because...
And they come back to us.
They will come back to... Yes, they come back. They will come back to us inevitably, and Europe will feel the impact and the onslaught of many more millions of refugees. I was in Ethiopia just a year ago, and to my surprise, I see and learn that Ethiopia in 20 years doubled its population from 40-something million to 90 million inhabitants in 20 years only. And there's something coming at us, and it's not only Ethiopia, it's Mali, Chad,
Well, you pointed out the
Senegal.
numbers. You pointed out the estimate of the population of Africa is in 2100 is supposed to be 3. It's now what? What's the population?
Now a billion.
A billion.
Could
It's supposed to be
almost
3.48 billion,
yeah.
which is just simply unsustainable.
Yeah, I think it's, maybe we could just spend a moment about Syria, because it's obviously something very important for
We'll spend a moment
our
'cause we're
country.
keeping
If we could, just a quick moment. You know, in Syria, the water crisis was extremely grave, especially at the end of the last decade. The drought was the worst in modern Syrian history. Some of my colleagues at Columbia in the Earth Institute studied the drought, and it was unlike anything seen for the past 100 years, and probably a reflection, not certainly, but probably a reflection of global warming exacerbating a dryland condition. And so during that period, 2006 to 2010, of course, people were suffering, crops failed, and about 1 million people migrated from their homes into the cities and into slums, and with ethnic mix, and it became quite a tinderbox because of that. Then 2011, you'll recall, was the beginning of the so-called Arab Spring, with the protests in Tunisia, and then in Egypt, and then in Syria. And Syria was already, it was already right at the edge. So protests started. Assad cracked down on the protesters, shot into crowds, protests increased. Then a decision was taken, and this is not well understood, and this is where America goes very wrong, in my opinion. The decision was taken: we should bring Assad down. It's time to throw him out. And that, to my mind, that's America's big mistake, that we start saying, that one goes, and we said it to governments simultaneously. This was Hillary and Barack. Spring of 2011, that Gaddafi needed to go in Libya, and Assad needed to go in Syria.
And Mubarak in Egypt, and now we have.
Yeah, well, they saw it.
Military dictatorship.
They saw it all as an opportunity to put in friendly regimes. It doesn't work that way. It's not so simple. So we started to fund a rebellion. And the Saudis and the Turks and the Qataris started to put in mercenaries and jihadists and weapons. And we know, but it's almost never reported, that President Obama signed a secret order for the CIA to cooperate with Saudi Arabia for the purpose of overthrowing Assad. And the point is that what started as a crisis of food and a repressive government turned into a regional war. And Americans sometimes think, well, you know, he drew a red line, but he didn't go in, and blah, blah, blah. That's not true. We're in it up to our necks because we have been funding, sending weapons from Libya. That was also part of the story. Cooperating with the CIA, providing logistics. And this thing blew up into a full-scale war that has killed 500,000 people now and displaced 10 million people. And that's on our watch. It's secret. That's, unfortunately, America. And our newspapers, starting with the New York Times, they hardly report. What they do is listen to the State Department. That's their in. So our official rhetoric is, we have stayed out, should we have stayed out and not stayed out? They ran one story about the CIA order, which is underpinned years of our bombings and our drones and all the rest. So the point I want to make is, life is complicated on this planet because we have ecological crises and political irresponsibility, and it's extremely dangerous for us. And we have spent $5 trillion on these wars now in the Middle East. If you add up Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and all of the special ops operations and the drone strikes in Yemen and Somalia, we've spent $5 trillion. Do you know what that could have done for the schools of this city and for safe drinking water in Flint and solving the problems in this country? And Trump ran his campaign saying that, by the way, and completely lied, because the first budget is another $54 billion for the military and cut out all of the development, cut out the science, slash the National Institutes of Health, cut out the environmental regulation. Come on. We're smarter than that, and we're all smarter than the President of the United States.
Well, okay. We've gone late, and I could go all night with the two of you and going on about this. It's always a pleasure. I think the lesson that we've got, that I try and give from what we just saw over this weekend, and the reason we wanted to run it at the Origins Project and invite these two wonderful men here, and the people we've had at our workshop to look at these things, is that the impact of knowledge and science and art, as I've said so many times on this stage, is to change the way we think about ourselves and our place, and eventually maybe cause actions. And we're privileged here, I think, to be able to do just that. The discussion we've had, the movie you've just shown, the movie you saw last night, the work you do, my hope is that it causes people to think about these issues, whether they agree or not, but to think about them and to learn more about what's actually happening and affect their actions. And the thing I want to read is it's sort of a question, but it's not, and I think it's important. It's from Linda, who said, "Had a conversation with my 40-year-old daughter about climate change. She said, 'No offense, Mom, but we might have to wait till your age group moves through its life cycle. I don't know anyone in my age group that denies climate change, nor do I know anyone in my children's age group, 6 to 14. Are there any demographics to support that idea? I'm 68 years old, and I know many deniers.'" And I think the point is, I don't know if this is true, but if it's true, it's a good thing. I think I said last night that in physics, Max Planck said that physics proceeds one funeral at a time. And the point is, if the younger generation, just as my daughter and her generation could not understand what the issue was about gay marriage, it wasn't a deal to them. And I knew then it didn't matter what old men in the Supreme Court or the Senate cared about, because the next generation had realized the world was different. If this is true, then hopefully the work that people like you and the people we've had here has had an impact, and people will change the way they work and think.
Let's look at you, Lawrence. You are a scientist, and I find it alarming that in the present cabinet there are a huge bunch of Goldman Sachs economists, and too many military people.
Yeah.
Why is there no scientist? Why is there no cosmologist in the cabinet? And it means,
well,
it means the scientific community should start to see the gap, the void, and step into it, run for office, become president of the United States.
Sure, that'll be the day.
Germany, by the way, is run by a physicist, Angela Merkel.
Quantum chemist, who I've talked to.
Yes.
It's amazing.
And, well, the fact is amazing, although many of the things she does I do not like.
Well,
but it doesn't matter. She's good, real good maintenance.
Yeah, the point is that my opinion is that the science, what we need, I think we should have more of everyone but lawyers in Congress. But the point is that what we need the scientists to do is do what we're doing here, which is to provide information so the public can act appropriately. And maybe the next generation, a president who isn't 72, but the next president who may be 42, will then be able to act accordingly, because the public will speak out. So we're privileged here to present this, and I hope you've enjoyed this weekend, those of you who've come. And we are very lucky at the Origins Project to be able to do this. And I really want to thank both of you so much, and all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry that I defended America.
No, it was good. It was good. It was good. It was good. Take care. It was perfect. Thank you again. We'll see you again. Thank you.